Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Next Time Around. Today's guest is Kevin Booker, an EV pioneer with over 20 years in the industry. He's a 5 times Guinness World Record holder, an award-winning EV rally driver, and a passionate advocate for the electric future. Kevin has worked on fleet electrification, advised on EV transformation strategies, and their projects to improve EV efficiency and integration. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Next Time Around, brought to you by Powerverse, the podcast where we take on the big questions of the green transition and explore how the world is changing for a cleaner, brighter future. We're your hosts, Lauren Forster
and Richard Britton.
And we'll be diving into the tech, the policies, and the big ideas that are reshaping industries and people's lives. Whether it's cutting-edge technology or shifting priorities, we're here to figure out what it all means for you and the world that we're building for tomorrow. So get ready as we take a fresh look at how changes today are laying the groundwork for a better next time around. It's great to have you here, Kevin. I think it'd be great to start with if you could talk us through your background and how you got into EVs.
So basically my background is I'm from an IT-based background, and over the years with driving long commutes and stuff, I've always been into sort of the efficiency thing, mainly because saving money and the fact that when you do a long 70-mile round trip commute, you kind of gamify it because I was trying to make it so that I could get there in the same time but using less fuel, and that kind of just moved on to electric vehicles and then kind of different roles and stuff. But that ended up with doing a couple of Guinness World Records, and then I've been quite involved with sort of the decarbonizations of fleets and rolling out EV infrastructure in a rural area.
That's exciting. Perhaps you can tell us about your world records. That clearly is a highlight.
So, again, it started by me sort of practicing in fuel cars and then moved on to electric vehicles. And it's just a chance conversation on an event called the MPG Marathon, which was run by a magazine called Fleet World. I'd met quite a few people there who we always were competing in sort of the efficiency thing, and just talking to the people who I got on with who were in the sort of top 10 of the sort of results with it, and said maybe we should do an EV record. And then it sort of started from there with us getting the first record, which was myself, a guy who was formerly Honda R&D, and a guy called Paul Clifton from the BBC. And we did John O'Groats to Land's End in a Mustang Mach-E using the least amount of energy, which we achieved an average of 6.5 miles per kilowatt hours for the whole journey. One charge stop, which was the other record, and that one charge stop was 43 minutes and 17 seconds. And it was about kind of showing the art of the possible, showing you could actually do these long distances. And then a few years later, did a van record, which was the longest distance to a single charge in a Fiat e-Scudo electric van, which was 311 miles, so just over the 500 kilometers mark. Weirdly, a lot of these records were aimed at Europe, so 500 sounded a nice round figure as well. So we managed to just get that. And then the last record I did, which is the one which has been beaten twice, actually, since the latest time more recently, was 567 miles to a single charge in a Mustang Mach-E. And I think the record now stands at over 600. So these EVs are improving so much that there's always more distance to be had in the... And hopefully over the next year, I'll try and find a vehicle to get that record back.
Well, congratulations on getting into the Guinness World Record book. I imagine it's something that everybody has a dream about when they're a child, and you've done it. And there's an interesting theme emerging from that, just to explore for a second, if that's okay. And it's clearly all about the range. Is that something that the industry is trying to communicate with the buyers and the consumers, that these vehicles are up to the job in some way? Is that why these records are getting set?
I mean, basically, the problem you have is a lot of the range of an electric vehicle, the same as the petrol and diesel vehicles before it, is based on the style of driving. And this is the problem, that the industry is measured by what's called WLTP, which is a standard across all manufacturers to give you an idea of range. But the problem is that a lot of people say that range can't be met. I mean, these records prove that you can go too far the other way. You can actually beat it by a significant margin. But it's always difficult because everyone's commute is different, everyone's driving style. So trying to get something that's an average is very difficult. And then you get quite negative news stories when people say, oh, they don't go as far. But that would be the same as, if you took a petrol vehicle around town, it would be awful compared to its official figure. It's all about kind of that balance. And I'm trying to show that you can do the extreme of it, just kind of counter. But yes, you can do the other extreme. If you drive it basically like you stole it, it's going to be far worse.
Yeah. And it sounds like the media are quite happy to promote those stories about range anxiety, which won't be helping.
Yeah, that's the thing is people, panic and say, oh, you'll get stuck on a motorway in winter. But you won't, because the heating doesn't take that much energy. And I've had people comment saying, well, it's no good if you have the aircon on. You'll be in a queue of traffic. You won't make it to the end. It's like the aircon, even in my car with a smaller battery, is going to run for days off the battery. So you'd have to be stuck in a queue for days and days. The biggest amount of energy you use for your air conditioning is getting it to that temperature. Once it's maintaining it, it's not too bad either.
Right.
I think the British like to queue, but not necessarily that much for days. You mentioned earlier about, obviously in your Guinness World Records, it's all about driving efficiently. Could you just explain what that really means and how people can ensure that they can go the distance with it?
I mean, with the record, it's the extreme of showing the art of the possible. So it's not what people would do every day. So in the record, we're probably not going to have the air conditioning on, and we'll be driving really smoothly. We'll be picking more urban routes, because the biggest thing once you get over a certain speed, say 60 miles an hour, is the aerodynamics, which again affects all vehicles, no matter what their powertrain. So for the records, it's the extreme. But actually, the everyday driver can kind of get more efficiency by doing things like reading the road ahead. Because so many people drive in what I class as a very binary way. So it's not an accelerator pedal, it's a switch. So basically, it's either on or off. And this is not great for efficiency. You're either going flat out or braking, and that wastes energy. If you brake gently, you're taking advantage of the regeneration braking and putting energy back into the battery. If you're braking sharply all the time, the car's just thinking, oh, you're going to have an accident. So it uses a mechanical brake. So that energy is then wasted as heat, which you could have been putting back in to make you go that little bit further. And again, it's sort of go with the flow of traffic on the motorway. Don't be the person racing that thinking I'm going to do 75 and assume your speed overreads. Just go with the flow of the traffic. If the motorway is predominantly going 65-ish, go 65. You might need one charge stop less. So actually your journey's quicker than if you were going at 70.
Quicker and cheaper, I guess.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is it's cheaper because, one of the big issues around vehicle charging is it's still significantly cheaper to charge at home. So the less charging you can do on a high-powered charger, which is expensive, the better it is for your pocket.
That's great. Thank you for explaining that. I guess if we move on to your experience of driving EVs, you've driven a lot of them. You obviously, I'm assuming, have a favourite, have a least favourite, but what's the best advice that you can give? There's a lot of people who are looking to move away from petrol, away from diesel, and buying their first electric vehicle. What's the best advice that you can give people who are looking?
I mean, the first thing is to make sure you get a proper home charger. I see so many people who've got driveways and are still charging with the kind of emergency cable you get, the 3-pin plug. One, it's not the most efficient way to charge your car because there's a lot of losses when you charge that slowly. And other times is you'll see people charging off an extension lead as well, which is coiled up. And even these little occasional chargers are basically taking 2,500 watts. So that's like you boiling a kettle for 14 hours. So that's where you have issues with heat because they've got the cable coiled up. So just the best advice is if you've got a driveway, get a proper charger. You can take advantage of off-peak energy rates then because you can actually set it on a timer. And just that's the first bit of advice. And the other thing is look for a car that suits your needs, whereas don't necessarily look for the biggest battery. There's sometimes you buy the biggest battery and then you find out they're commuting 10 miles. So you've paid a lot of money to carry around a really large battery. And at the end of the day, that adds more weight. So you might find a car that's more efficient with less battery. Because I've found more recently, I've tested a lot of the new Vauxhall products. And on paper, they look quite small batteries because they're 51 kilowatt hours. But the new motor is so efficient that you're getting easily 250 miles out of a charge. And actually, the Corsa was the most efficient car on my test route. I've got sort of eco test route, which is about 30 mile an hour loop, and that achieved 8.1 miles per kilowatt hour on that. And that so far has been the most efficient car. But it's because it's not a big SUV. It's a normal city car. I mean, people say it's quite small, but you think that actually the things like the new Corsa are bigger than lots of family cars from like 20 years ago.
You're really making me rethink how I look at EVs, Kevin. Really interesting. There's all of these subtleties that you need to consider, but I suppose we haven't had to do it in the past, so people are just getting used to these new frames of reference. So thank you. I had one question to bring you back to, actually. You mentioned if you've got a driveway, what are the options for people who don't have a driveway, who are looking for their first EV?
I mean, these are the difficult ones because you've got to rely on public charging, which can work out significantly more expensive. If I'm paying 8.5 pence a kilowatt hour, you go to a rapid charger, you could be paying 85 pence a kilowatt hour. So you can see how many times that is there. So I think there's more work that needs to be done with that around maybe community charging or even technologies that will allow you to, if you've got shared areas of chargers, your RFID tag maybe would allow you to charge at the same rate as home. And look at things like more destination charging. I mean, on street is one of the things. You've got the charge gully, which is a thing for people who can sort of park close to their house, which is another option. But there is going to be a sector where we really have to work on a solution for, because otherwise it's going to be much more expensive for people who haven't got driveways.
So gully charging, probably lamppost charging. There's platforms out there now where you can rent out the charger that you've got on your driveway to other people, and they still get to take advantage of those cheaper rates, I suppose. And probably, even if you are charging at the fast charger, it's unlikely to be as expensive as if you're filling up a tank of diesel or petrol.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a mix of a lot of technologies. And actually, at the moment, there's a big rollout of rapid chargers, which is quite expensive. So I think once they've rolled out, you get critical mass of EVs, hopefully the prices will start to come down on those rapid chargers because there'll be more competition in the market and there's not the infrastructure rollout, which is a big cost at the moment.
Yes, very interesting.
I think what would be great to kind of talk through before we move on into like different areas is there is a lot of misconceptions in the market. You've obviously done the documentary, Should I Buy an Electric Car? Would you be able to cover like what most people get wrong when it comes to EVs? Because obviously the news is saying one thing, the news is saying another thing. It's all very confusing.
I mean, it's very easy to get stuff wrong because even in the documentary I did, they got their maths wrong because we worked it out with I did 4.4 miles per kilowatt hour, which would be pretty much bang on WLTP. And when we watched the documentary back, it's like, no, that's more than 240 miles you said. So the problem is there's a lot of misinformation and maybe people rush to do stuff and then you write one digit in the wrong place and you've made a positive story a negative one. So I think it's all those sort of things all work into the narrative where people worry about EVs. I think of them as just a car that happens to be powered by electric. And I think that's what more people need to start doing. It doesn't need to be a polar debate like it is.
And do you think more people are finally shifting in their attitudes, that people are starting to come around to the view that it's just another vehicle and it's a slightly different way of doing things, or not?
I think it's difficult because I think what you've got now is that a lot of people who are going to go are going, but then there's a lot of narrative, negative and positive. And I think actually there are faults on both sides of the argument because lots of people are overly positive and we can't ignore the fact it is quite expensive if you can't charge at home. So I think both sides, there's extremes of both sides. And then you've got the one saying every time there's a vehicle fire, making the assumption it's an electric vehicle fire. And yes, there are EV fires, but they're significantly less than petrol fires and stuff. And it's just, I think it's that balance, which is what we need to try and get across. I mean, and the other thing is you're always going to have people who are scared of change. And this is probably the most fundamental shift in how we power our transport. No longer is it 5 minutes putting a flammable liquid in. I mean, you could argue if there was social media back when the horse transitioned to the car, would these arguments have been the same, saying, why are you getting rid of a perfectly good horse to get a car?
The answer's probably isn't it, I'm sure. That history is littered with people not liking the change and what's sort of going to happen next. And that probably brings us on to another topic, which is something that you've been directly involved in as the world of transport's changing, and you've spent time working on fleet electrifications. Are you able to tell us a bit about the benefits of electrifying fleets for driving?
One of the biggest benefits is what I found is lower maintenance. You don't have the faults with clutches and things going because they are generally just an automatic. So there's just drive and go. I mean, people worry about the batteries. In all the years I've been doing fleet, I've not had any battery failures or any motor failures. I've had stuff fail on cars, which fails on all cars, suspension stuff, bushes and stuff, but that's the same as a conventional car. But as far as powertrain goes, probably the biggest issue with, it's not just electric vehicles, is that old-fashioned 12-volt battery that sits in them, which goes in modern cars, because you've got so many different infotainment systems and connected technologies. I think it's probably about time we looked at a new technology for that old-fashioned lead-acid 12-volt battery. That's the biggest issue with them, but it's an easy fix. People forget you can actually jump-start an electric car exactly the same way as a petrol car. All it needs is power, and once you power it up, it switches on the DC to DC converter and starts charging the little battery. But yeah, I found it a lot easier, lower maintenance, cheaper to run, easier to drive. People seem to have, I'm going to have to say touch wood, less accidents in the EV because they're actually focusing on the road, because they don't have to worry about what gear do I need to be on this hill and things like that.
Very true.
Yeah, and I guess it would be great if you could talk through like one of your projects. Like obviously EV fleets in rural areas can play a really important role in supporting local energy within the communities, etc. Can you talk us through like what you've done there?
So one of the roles is for a national park, which is kind of a big rollout of charging infrastructure, because the rural area back in 2016, when I put the first EV on a fleet, there wasn't a charging infrastructure in the rural area. So we had to build out the charging infrastructure to go with all the EVs. We've had an advantage with that. I think National Park now, we probably have close to probably over 40 chargers rolled out within the National Park. I mean, a lot of them are publicly accessible as well. So including some rapid chargers on a country park site, which are publicly available. Then, one site alone has over 15 chargers just on one site, and that's in a rural area where people have traditionally said you can't do that sort of thing.
I imagine there was a lot of upgrades needed from a DNO perspective to make that rural fast charging available, was there?
So that's one of probably the biggest projects, because that's got a 1 MVA transformer on site now. So that's got its own transformer for that site, which was a challenge to get in, especially in a site that's classed as in a national park and in a listed garden and stuff like that. So the fun part was hiding the transformer.
Well, as an EV driver, it's nice to know that it's there, so that if I turn up in this national park and I need to have a rapid charge, then that option's open to me, right?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and there's the scope on that site at the moment. The chargers were provided by Transport for Wales. So they're currently 50 kilowatt ones, but the scope on that site, technically, you could go much higher because of the size of the transformer there. And we've also not done it in isolation, so there's lots of solar on that site, battery storage. So it's all in that mix. I've always found with the projects, same with depot charging, is to look at it holistically. So not just look at the charging infrastructure, you're looking at how their energy's created. So all of our sites, generally, which have charging, have massive solar arrays on them now. And they're ones that are on the roof. So we've not taken up like prime bits of the countryside, which people say, oh, you've covered that lovely field with solar panels. They're all on roofs which were already there.
Amazing. It sounds like you've had a pretty big transformation in the last 10 years. And have you seen like any other benefits, like obviously from being able to do that? You've now got the whole fleet like as EVs, got the solar. Is it like quite a self-sufficient site now?
It would be great to be self-sufficient, but generally, like most of these things, the vehicles are out in the day when it's sunny. So that's why we've started to introduce battery storage to try and mitigate that, and also to look at time shifting. So we're storing energy when the sun's out and then using it when the sun's not out. So, I mean, the biggest thing we've noticed is literally how quiet our sites have become. You don't have noisy engines. And we've also switched to even like some of the tools they use on those sites are now electric chainsaws and stuff, which has massive health benefits from the fact you're not cutting stuff off a tree that close to an exhaust and breathing in all the rubbish. Let's just say chainsaw engines are probably not the cleanest of engines, being such a little one. There's not much room for advanced exhaust treatment like you get on a traditional petrol car.
I think there have been studies done, haven't there, about people working with that kind of heavy equipment and how the noise pollution as well as the chemicals and gases as well are taking years off their lives. So it's good to hear that there's some advantages there.
So if we go on to like your personal setup, so obviously you've done a lot in terms of the working space to improve the environment, but could you talk us through like what your home setup looks like?
Usually I have 2 chargers at home for 2 electric cars. I also have 2 solar arrays, but it'd be great if I could have one, but one is on the old feed-in tariff and one is on the newer system with battery storage, which meant I couldn't, because of the way feed-in works, you can't adjust your original system. I mean, I have designed it in such a way that if one of my inverters was to fail, both inverters have enough capacity to run both arrays. So that's a handy thing. Also, with the chargers, I've got stuff so I can remotely start one, so I can use the excess from when my batteries are full. I can choose to use the excess from the sun to go into a car. Again, not the most efficient way to charge at the slower speeds, but if it's going to the grid anyway and I'm not getting paid for it, I may as well put it in a car. I mean, my car technically supports vehicle to load, so I could go the other way if I needed to and run my house off my car. There are starting to become chargers that can initiate that. There's some new ones to market. I think Renault have announced a partnership for the first one because the new Renault 5 supports the vehicle to load. I mean, and that's one of the good things with all new EVs. So many of them, you can use them as a power station. So in a power cut, you could power your house for days off your car.
And what does that mean in terms of the charging infrastructure that you need at home? So you're going to have a different setup of wall charger, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, the early ones which worked with the Nissan Leaf had a very specific charger that worked with CHAdeMO, so it was technically a DC charger. But there are now ones where it seems that you can, on a lot of vehicle-to-load cars, send the signal to reverse it, so through the control pin. So what the vehicle-to-load adapter does, you can do, and it will synchronize it and everything to run through your mains, which is quite clever because it must have to synchronize the phase-in of it, because otherwise you'll be running power out of phase from one thing to another. So, I mean, that's going to be the next big thing, is doing that via AC, where you're using the car's onboard inverter to go back to AC electricity. And they're a lot smaller. The DC ones used to be huge, whereas now there's like the normal charger.
Obviously, with like lots of devices kind of within the home, do you find like there's any kind of complications? Are you having to use like multiple apps to control them? Like, are there any opportunities like there that you feel can make that adoption easier?
Yeah, I mean, that is the one thing, is literally I've got so many apps on my phone. I've got an app for my original charger. I've got an app for my new charger. I've got an app for my first solar array. I've got an app for my second solar array with battery storage. So, like, I've just had a notification that there's going to be an Octopus Savers session tonight. And the complexity of that, to work out which apps I've got to configure to make sure it doesn't do that. I mean, probably the saving sessions are easy because my battery's full enough now, so it'll just run through it. The worst ones are when they give you a free hour of power or 2 hours, when then I have to go and reconfigure every device independently to actually take power at the right time. Yeah, that's the one thing I wish there was more around that. I mean, I know people who have started to do stuff with, there's an open source piece of software called Home Assistant, and they've started to do plugins and stuff with it. But it would be good if you could buy an off-the-shelf thing that would talk to all these protocols and actually join these things together. I mean, it's something I'm looking at in with the work thing as well, because all of these systems have multiple different devices, and there just needs to be someone who can come up with a product that can glue all these things together to take advantage of your off-peak charging or your free power things or your agile electricity tariffs, but something that can do it all for you.
I was chatting to somebody this morning, actually, who's a serious Home Assistant user and has all of the different projects and has got lots of stuff automated. the conversation I was having with him was, that's great, but you're able to do it because you're a technical guy, and most of the people who are going to start adopting need to have these things done for them with simpler technology that brings it all together with some kind of Android-like system that can glue together all of that different hardware, which is the space that we're in. So that was why we had the conversation. But you're right. I think at the moment the choices are limited to, this is in my view, so I'm interested in your view. You kind of got the Tesla type world where you can go to an ecosystem and get all of that kit from one vendor and it'll kind of all work together. But as soon as you venture out into, like you just described, you got two different inverters and one of them's connected to a battery and a couple of different chargers and, lots of cars from what I've gathered. Having something that will still be able to run those power flows for you the best way on the best price based on the data and things, no matter what kit you've got, is something people want, but not particularly out there right now.
I mean, that was one of the reasons I upgraded my chargers over time, because having a lot of test cars, it's a lot of hassle to set the timer on individual cars, and some work better than others. I simplified it, and now I ignore the car's timer because my charger will only switch on during those off-peak Octopus Go hours. And the other one with the app. So one's an older BP one, and one's a newer one. So the older BP one, the app is older, so it doesn't have the way you can set a timer on it, but that's about it. The newer one is much more flexible, where you can set the speed of charge, which is great if you want to export some for the sun. You just say, don't go over 2 kilowatts, and then you watch it until it starts taking your battery. I mean, and that's the other complication with battery storage, is you've got to have so many different clamp meters to do stuff, because if you did it just on the outgoing for the excess, it's fine until the sun goes behind a cloud. Your battery seamlessly takes over, so it keeps taking the same amount of power because it sees, there's power not coming in, so it must be power going out, so it must be the sun. So it's that integration, which is a big project.
Absolutely. And it's the next big innovation that's necessary in the home by the sound of it.
Yeah, and it needs to be simple, so someone can just, almost need someone to take that open source technology of Home Assistant and build it into a nice package where you just get it, plug it in, and it works.
Well, at the moment, it's the domain of hobbyists, isn't it? But, people seem to be enjoying the challenge.
That's it.
I have to say, as someone who is unfortunately not on an EV yet, that sounded very complicated to me. So having something that can make that more simple would be beneficial. So one day, hopefully I'll get there.
So there's some fascinating discussion, Kevin, about how it all comes down to how we manage that energy and where it goes to make the most out of it. As I understand it, that's happening on a kind of regional and national level as well, as companies and businesses and so on are starting to move the power around within, you'd call it their own power plant, within their own virtual power plant. I was wondering, in your sort of experience in your professional environment, that idea of the virtual power plant and the VPP, if there's opportunities to make some money out of those standing batteries which are on the wheels across your site.
That's something which I've looked at, which we'd love to do, but we found in a rural area, you struggle to even get a smart meter now, to even take advantage of off-peak tariffs. So, as a three-phase customer, you think, it's going to be straightforward. Can I have a smart meter? We're still at the level of, even with new meters going in, of having to read the numbers off it, which is madness, because those are the type of things, when you're trying to run the fleet or go through sort of systems that you actually want to minimize paperwork for yourself. You want these things I'm not afraid of smart meters, even for the home thing. I just want it to do it itself. I don't need to waste time going to sites, opening boxes, probably taking photos with my phone because it'll be too dark in the cabinet just to do that. I want those things automated. I'm happy for those things to be automated, but it's trying to get the scope for the grid providers and the DNOs to actually start rolling those out, because it would make my life a lot easier if I could do that. And even looking out my window now, I look at all the roofs of the houses in the housing estate. I'm thinking, why don't you make new housing estates virtual power plants and have it from the beginning where everything's got a solar panel on the roof? And actually, how much could you cut the grid usage to peak times if everyone had that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the government are trying to get there with the grid, because they're starting to change policy and change the rules so that, a housing estate could start to put its excess solar back into the grid, and it could use those local batteries on driveways to earn money overnight. But I guess it'll all take time, and the first barrier is getting the smart meters, as you say.
Yeah, and I mean, and something like a housing estate, that puts the power back to communities because you're generating your own community energy. And maybe you don't need to build these massive power plants somewhere because actually you've built a power plant where people live.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And it opens up a lot of opportunities there to kind of make new revenue for business, for the consumer, the person within the home, to reduce their bills to zero and to also balance out the supply and demand as well.
Exactly.
So when it comes to policy, what have you seen that kind of works really well for kind of EV, the kind of smart home adoption?
I think the biggest issue you have with policy is uncertainty. It's better if you set a policy, just stick to it. I mean, we've seen how it's all with the ZEV mandate move in, then not move in and stuff. It's confusion. Manufacturers don't like confusion. What people forget is people think your new car that you get next week, there's a new model, came out like, developed it like 2 or 3 months before. The new car cycle is massively long. So as when they say you bought a brand new model, I'm trying to think of a brand new model, say like, I don't know, you bought a brand new BYD Sea Lion, which has fairly been launched recently. They've started developing the replacement for that as soon as the current one's launched because it's such a long cycle with safety testing and all these things. So certainty is what you need because you can't just as a manufacturer suddenly stop all you think, oh, we've wound down petrol car development. Oh, I've got to wind it back up again. And it's those uncertainties is what costs money. I think the biggest thing with all policies is just set one, stick to it because markets and industries need that certainty.
Do you think that the vehicle manufacturers have gone past the point of no return yet in terms of the investments they've made in their plant and equipment and their operations to support EV or not?
I think with the sort of development cycle, I think anything they bring back is going to be using a certain degree of legacy technology. So it's not going to be, if you look, I can't see any manufacturers that have brought out massively new traditional petrol engine technology. It's been an evolution of the thing. There's still a bit of scope for plug-in hybrid technology as batteries have gone down. It's like last week I drove 9 countries in a plug-in hybrid. And the mad thing is this plug-in hybrid in less than a decade has a bigger battery and more electric range than the first EV we drove in 2015. So the pace of change has been that rapid. And I think so there's technologies like that because we've got to be honest in the EV space that some people aren't ready for it and they need to be brought along the journey in a sort of more considered way, not just force them. Like maybe a plug-in hybrid would be the right technology for them to think, oh, I've actually only driven on electric. And I think that's, again, the arguments on both sides. I think we both need to be more considered that some people are going to struggle with that change. And the best way we can bring them is to bring them along on that journey, not try and say, you're doing this, and they get scared by it, and then they push back, which is, I think, this is why the debate becomes so polarized.
Can I ask you a question? Because I've often wondered this myself. I've never driven a plug-in hybrid, and I moved straight from petrol to electric. Been very happy with the transition, but I know a lot of people who drive plug-in hybrids. So what's the case? What's the argument for the plug-in hybrid, and how does it sort of fit into the mix of everything else?
So there's certain situations that kind of you can use an EV, but it's not, the infrastructure is not ideal. One of them, if you tow something, yes, you can tow with electric vehicles, but how many charging hubs, if you discount the ones like Braintree, can you drive through, plug in and charge without unhitching your trailer or caravan? So those ones, you need to more catering for that because technically you can't really leave your caravan in the middle of a motorway services and go and charge. So there's technologies like that. And the other thing is the early plug-in hybrids, they were tax efficient, but not necessarily efficient. But now with the newer Euro 7 standards, you've got vehicles with those big 38 kilowatt hour battery packs, which can go 90 miles. So actually they work as a transition one because not everyone can afford to have 2 vehicles. So if it doesn't work for them on their longer stuff, I mean, it's a good solution that you can do all your around town stuff, purely electric, you get used to charging at home, and the next time think, actually, I never used the fuel. So there's situations like that, and it kind of fits as a transition. I know lots of people say that it's actually stifling demand, but we've got to bring people along this journey. And I think it's a gateway to it, because in a perfect world, someone might say, well, I'll have my little EV, but then I'll keep a fuel car for those long runs where I tow the caravan. But that's not going to happen with many people. You're using twice the resources for a start to have two. So actually, it can fit in as a transition vehicle for people who aren't quite ready for it, not really sure, just to find out what it is. And now they really near the end of the transition to full electric. Plug-in hybrids actually work. It's gone are the days where an Outlander is never plugged in. People are plugging these in, doing, think that the air quality improvements of your school run is still going to be purely electric. So they have their place. No doubt it's a transition technology, but it's to help us get to that transition to full electric.
Thank you. That was really helpful and insightful for me. It's completely cleared up the role of the plug-in hybrid. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really great point, because everyone in life works at a different pace, don't they? It's not that everyone goes through life at the same point. So it applies here as well. And I think that's quite easy to forget, isn't it? That actually you go, oh, it's one or the other, but it's not necessarily as black and white as that.
I mean, that's the thing. It's quite funny when you talk to, when I've done presentations to school groups, for them, it's very black and white. It's like, to their parents, why aren't you driving an EV? And it's like, when you're an adult, it's like, maybe that person doesn't have £40,000 to drop on an EV to go that, and they've got a car that works for them, but it's a couple of £1,000. And that's the thing. It's all about, there are grey areas and how this transition is. The same as, there'll be lots of, we shouldn't discount hydrogen for the mix for big heavy stuff that is hard to do. I think everything needs to be considered, but generally EV is that's the direction of travel, and you don't want to waste energy converting it to different things. The same as I've seen a lot of stuff about people pushing saying, oh, synthetic fuels are the answer. It's like, synthetic fuels were never designed to replace petrol or diesel. They were for the fringe things like motorsport and classic cars and things like that. So at the end of the day, who's going to pay £15 a litre for synthetic fuel? It's going to be for your people who they're old collectors' cars, which they're keeping on the road. So stuff like that. It's not designed to be for your daily runabout to go to the shops.
What I like about this is you've thought it through from all these different perspectives of different people's needs, and there's a role for all of these things, but it's just about the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, it's all about balance and stuff, and that's, I think, what is missing from the EV ICE argument is there's not much balance. It's just two polar opposites, and one side seems to have to hate the other, and I try and make it not about that, about saying, there's lots of different views, and the right balance is going to be a combination of certain elements of it, but predominantly the electric vehicle.
It sounds like politics there. So we can't not ask you, Kevin, what your favourite EV is, given your experience with test driving lots of them.
So my favourite EV is going to be something that no one expects me to pick as my favourite EV, because we talked about things not being polar opposites. It's the polar opposite of what people would expect me to pick. So of all the cars I've tested, probably my favourite one has been the Ioniq 5N, which is the stupidly quick 650 brake horsepower one. Yes, it's not the most efficient because it's 650 brake horsepower. And I kind of like the way they've gamified it. The fact it has virtual gear shifts if you want it. And it has a virtual engine noise. And the fact that literally you can, if you really want to, you can pop and bang down the gears like a traditional thing. And I think loads of people say EVs have no soul, but actually with software, you can engineer that soul into it and have the fun stuff. I mean, and it is literally just the clever software engineering. The gear shifts feel like gear shifts. You have that delay and everything. It doesn't need to do it, but it can. And the things like dropping down the gears, and even to that extent, if you're on the motorway in 8th and you go to put your foot down, it has no torque whatsoever because they've engineered it to do that. And you do have to kick it down a few virtual gears. I think there needs to be more kind of that thing in EVs just to get your petrol heads infused and stuff. And just, yeah, it's a bit of fun. It doesn't need it. But, what's the harm in having some fun in an EV?
Yeah, great answer.
Yeah, love that. And I definitely wasn't expecting you to say that. So a nice surprise. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Kevin, on Next Time Round. It's been great to hear all about fleet electrification, everything that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next Guinness World Record coming through.
Hopefully I can get some more. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn by searching Powerverse, or share it with someone who might find it helpful. To find out more about our software, visit our website www.powerverse.com. Thanks for listening to Next Time Around. Until next time.